A massive investigative report by BuzzFeed News finds that the largest banks in the United States have been willingly and knowingly been laundering money for international crime rings. And the way that they handle this is by just continuing to do business with them, knowing full well that the Treasury Department is not going to hold them accountable and they won't have to face any consequences. If you don't believe me, you should absolutely read the full report because it's incredible. It gives you far more detail than we can give you in this particular video. But I'm gonna do my best to give you the highlights because this is happening right now as crazy QAnon conspiracy theorists think that there's a child sex trafficking ring that's being run by all sorts of political people they dislike, when in reality, our largest financial institutions are laundering money for actual child sex trafficking rings, and they're getting away with it. So profits from deadly drug wars, fortunes embezzled from developing countries, and hard-earned savings stolen in a Ponzi scheme were all allowed to flow into and out of these financial institutions despite warnings from the bank's own employees. In fact, a former investigator with Wachovia Bank, his name is Martin Woods, told BuzzFeed News, quote, "Some of these people in those crisp white shirts and their sharp suits are feeding off the tragedy of people dying all over the world." And it's not as though the Treasury Department has been kept in the dark about this. They know about some of these criminal transactions and they decided to do nothing about it. So as BuzzFeed News writes, the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, or FinCEN, is the agency within the Treasury Department charged with combating money laundering, terrorist financing, and other financial crimes. It collects millions of suspicious activity reports known as SARs. It makes them available to US law enforcement agencies and other nations' financial intelligence operations. It even compiles a report called Kleptocracy Weekly that summarizes the dealings of foreign leaders. So they know, they're like, hey, let's put together a fun news alert about it, little newsletter about it. It's insane. Okay, so let's talk about the process in which banks need to file these reports, and then we'll give you some specifics on what BuzzFeed News was able to find by poring over these documents. So FinCEN Files flagged more than $2 trillion in transactions between 1999 and 2017. Western banks could have blocked almost any of them, but in most cases, they kept the money moving and kept collecting their fees. In some cases, banks filed numerous reports on the same clients detailing their suspected crimes over the course of years while continuing to welcome their business. So basically, as long as the banks file those reports, the SARS reports, right? They're basically at that point immune from being held accountable for continuing to do business with these, illegal groups, with these criminal groups, because at that point, it's up to the Treasury Department to really fully investigate the claims and to hold those individuals accountable. But the Treasury Department has always been pretty hands-off, and it's been worse under the Trump administration, where Rod Rosenstein essentially said, let's not pile on. Let's not pile on to these banks. Okay, let's just leave it alone. And yeah, they've been leaving it alone. So let me give you some more. Actually, Cenk, I'm sorry, I'm like rambling on because the story excites me. But why don't you jump in?
Yeah. So first, this is bipartisan. Eric Holder, Obama's attorney general, literally testified in Congress that the bankers are too big to jail. And he said, well, if we do that, that could hurt the global economy, and we don't want to do that. Well, that means as attorney general, you just gave them a get out of jail free card. You could break any law, and we've decided you're too big to jail. So have at it, Hoss. And you didn't think they were going to break the law? Of course. So now a lot of things the Republicans do worse, but in terms of letting the bankers rob us, Democrats are just as good as Republicans on that issue. So look, guys, once the Supreme Court in the late 1970s said that corporations can give money to politicians, they actually made a great number of illegal sectors of the economy legal. So loan sharks became payday lenders. And then they just contribute to politicians and they could charge whatever interest rate they want. And they got rid of the old laws on loan sharking, and they put on suits. And they go, oh, that's an official guy, and he gave a politician money. They're now respectable. Drug dealers became big pharma. So big pharma said, oh, I got a great idea. Why don't we put heroin inside OxyContin? And it'll look official like any other pill, and we'll have suits on. So the drug dealers became legal, and they just bribed the politicians, and the politicians let them deal drugs all across the country, get people addicted, and about tens of thousands, I think it's 40,000, sometimes more, people a year die from just that, from drug dealers that are perfectly legal. And now for the bankers, they made money laundering legal. Yeah. Oh, you want to do it for terrorists who murder Americans? Who cares? That's $2 trillion. That's a lot of money we're gonna money launder, and we're gonna make a ton of money off that. You want to do it for other illicit activities and dictators? Who cares? Who cares? Are we making money or not? So the money launderers then put on suits and gave money to politicians, and we've completely lost our government ever since then. And look, guys, we're doing defund the police on the left, and the right wing is losing their minds, right? Oh my God, you can't defund the police. But what did they do? They took the cops off the street on Wall Street. So whether it was the SEC or any other governmental body that could regulate Wall Street, they defunded them, including, by the way, the IRS. So that said to everybody, cheat on your taxes, cheat in the banks, cheat anywhere you want as long as you're rich. We've defunded the police for you.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And when it comes to the IRS, they've been defunded to the point where they don't focus on auditing high-level tax frauds, wealthy people who might be claiming fake deductions and all sorts of nonsense in order to avoid paying taxes. They focus all their energies on people who barely make enough money to get by. So these policies obviously do hurt Americans in, not raising enough revenue to fund programs that we desperately need. But then there's also the added bonus of people living in poverty who get hit with these audits, while people who are incredibly wealthy get left alone. So let me give you some specific examples that were outlined by BuzzFeed. And look, we're in the Trump era, so a story like this is the kind of reporting that I love. I want to see more of this stuff. And I give the team that worked on this story a lot of credit, because this is not an easy thing to report on. And I just hate that something like this is just gonna get lost in the shuffle. But if you can, please spread this story, share this story. And when it comes to the financial institutions that we're referring to in the context of this story, if you're banking with them, get your money out, get your money out. They're laundering money for the worst people in the world, knowingly. Get your money out, put it in a financial institution that actually has morals and ethics. Aspiration is one of our partners, and it's because we believe in them and we believe in what they're doing. They don't invest money in the fossil fuel industries. And I haven't seen any negative news stories about Aspiration doing any of this garbage stuff that we're hearing from some of these big banks. So with that said, and by the way, go to aspiration.com/TYT to learn more about that financial institution. So let's talk about the specific examples. By December of 2013, JP Morgan Chase had filed at least 8 SARs on accounts and companies controlled by Manafort, flagging more than $10 million according to a FinCEN research report. We all know what happened to Manafort later. He went on to become Trump's campaign chair and was convicted of bank and tax fraud in 2018. This is my favorite example. So this was a big story that you covered in great detail, Cenk, in 2012, after permitting narco traffickers to launder money and contributing business in off-limits countries such as Sudan and Myanmar. HSBC was fined $1.9 billion. FinCEN Files investigation shows HSBC continued banking and profiting from the same kinds of customers that got them in trouble in the first place, such as a Panamanian import-export firm that the Treasury Department later said was laundering money for drug kingpins. Like, it's people with possession of marijuana are still serving insanely long prison sentences in the United States, while this bank is laundering money for narco traffickers. Like, just let that sink in for a second.
Okay, so first of all, the story link is in the description box. You should always check out the description box on YouTube and Facebook so you can get more information. But I'll give you more information now. Dick Cheney's Halliburton had a subsidiary that had brazenly violated the sanctions against Iran all the way back when Cheney and Bush were elected. And Cheney would go out and say, it's an outrage if anybody violates the sanctions, full well knowing he was the CEO of the company that was violating sanctions on that same exact country. They think the rules don't apply to them. If they make money off it, who cares? But God help you if you did it. If you money laundered for a terrorist organization, do you know what you'd get? Pretty much a life sentence. Unless you're a banker, in which case you'd get nothing. You'd get a bonus, to be honest. And that's literal. So if they paid a $1.9 billion fine, which they did, and they went back to doing the same exact thing the next day, that means they made at least $2 billion off of what they were doing. So the $1.9 billion fine was just the cost of doing business. And when Eric Holder said, we will never jail any bankers, that was a green light to break any law you like. Don't worry, it's just the cost of doing business. And when we fine you, we have an understanding. We'll obviously fine you less than your margin. So you could still make a profit, at least enough of a profit to donate back to Barack Obama and Donald Trump and George W. Bush. And that's how this game is played.
Yeah, it's crazy. I got to give you one more example, but there are more in the report. Again, this has to do with JP Morgan Chase. As BuzzFeed reports, for years, JP Morgan Chase was the primary bank of the world's biggest Ponzi schemer, Bernie Madoff. Despite multiple warnings from its own employees, the bank never filed a suspicious activity report on him and allegedly collected $500 million in fees. Because again, guys, this is about their bottom line. They don't care if you're a criminal or not. If they can collect free fees from you, especially to the tune of $500 million, they're gonna do it. For punishment, the bank was required to pay a $1.7 billion fine and promised to improve its money laundering defenses. But after it settled the Madoff case, the bank's own investigators said they suspected it had opened its accounts to an alleged Russian organized crime figure who is known for drug trafficking and contract murders. Sounds pretty serious, as well as businesses tied to the repressive North Korean regime, which the United States has placed off limits. They just kept doing it, guys. They kept doing it and they did it even worse. And it doesn't even matter because the president's a criminal. Steve Mnuchin, who is the head of the Treasury, is a criminal. He had to face consequences when his bank, One West, committed fraud in order to wrongfully foreclose on people's homes after the financial collapse. These people are criminals. So how are you gonna expect criminals to hold criminals accountable?
Well,
they do criminal stuff together. They love it.
So we're the last show on earth to do false equivalency. So on almost every other issue, we'll tell you why the Republicans are worse than the Democrats. If that's the case, there's one or two issues that Democrats are worse than the Republicans on. In this case, it is completely bipartisan. You want to know who let off Steve Mnuchin when he broke the law in California? Kamala Harris, now running for VP on the Democratic ticket. And by the way, did she get a campaign donation for that? In a wild coincidence, she did. And if you go to New York, by the way, Cyrus Vance, Democratic district prosecutor there in Manhattan, nonstop political contributions. And then guys like Harvey Weinstein walked after he got a contribution, or he would set them free and then he'd get a giant contribution afterwards. And he did that for some of the Trump figures as well. So this is how things go around. As long as you allow bribery, you will also, by definition, allow money laundering, loan sharking, drug dealing, all sorts of criminality because they just pay the refs off at the end. And along those lines, just two more quick explanations. Guys, when you see a $500 million that they made off of Bernie Madoff, understand that executives got paid bonuses based on how much money they made in those years. If the bank gets caught later and has to pay a fine, who cares? They already got their bonus. If they got their bonus in 97 and the bank gets caught in 2003, they're probably at a different place already. No one cares. The only way you'll ever get them to care is if you say, if you break the law while you're at a bank, you are going to go to prison. Then you will get their attention. Until then, the highway robbery will continue unabated. And finally, you're saying, well, there is one guy you mentioned there that worked in finance that actually did get busted and is still in prison. That's Bernie Madoff. So does that mean somebody's doing something? No. Bernie Madoff made a terrible mistake. If you rip off the poor or the middle class, you could do it till the cows come home. Bernie Madoff stole from the rich. So that's the one thing you cannot get away with in America.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.